Hello and welcome back. If you're anything like my mother-in-law, you may have wondered why there are so many wars in the Book of Mormon. What was the point in including them? And since this video series is currently right in the middle of what are commonly called the war chapters of Alma, I thought I'd take a minute to address this. And we'll look at it from an angle that you probably haven't considered before. An Ensign article from 2012 notes that of the 239 chapters in the Book of Mormon, 174 of them deal with war, terrorism, murder, political conspiracies, secret combinations, family collusions, or other hostilities. That means that 73% of the chapters at least mention war, violence, or corruption. But even that aside, Mormon dedicates 15 or 20 solid chapters in the Book of Alma to discussing Captain Moroni's military efforts and strategies and so on. And I've heard some people suggest it was because Mormon, who wrote the book, was a general, which he was. And so they suggest that he loved wars and strategies and such. Similar to how Elder Uchtdorf, who was a commercial airline pilot, makes frequent references to aviation and kind of sees the world through that lens. But even though he was appointed general of the army at a very young age, there's no indication that Mormon loved or even liked war. In fact, it's pretty much the contrary. And also, how does reading about military strategy help us? I'm not even in the military, much less leading an army. And, well, neither are you. So it doesn't seem likely that he included those chapters to discuss or to teach us military strategy. Another possibility is that although the war chapters are true, he used them more as parables or metaphors. And in my opinion, that's closer to the truth. But there's more to it than that. Now, this is going to seem like a tangent, but bear with me for just a minute. You may or may not have heard of Milton Erickson. He was the father of modern hypnosis, and many people consider him to be the greatest hypnotist who ever lived. He was colorblind, tone deaf, dyslexic, and he became crippled by polio as a teenager. His life story is pretty fascinating, but I'm not going to go into it today. Erickson was known for using metaphors in his clinical hypnosis practice. To give a grossly oversimplified example, a patient might come to him for help overcoming a nail-biting habit. Rather than talking to his client about nail-biting, Erickson, who eventually became wheelchair-bound, would spend a few minutes rambling about how much he enjoyed doing yard work, manicuring his lawn and edging the driveway. And then he dismissed the client from his office. A few days later, the client called the office angry and demanding his money back. "I came to you for treatment," he said, "and you didn't even hypnotize me. You just talked about yourself and your stupid little hobbies." "Well, yes, but how are your nails?" "Well, I don't bite them anymore, but that had nothing to do with you." And that's just one example of the type of metaphor that Erickson used in his practice. Over the years, he used hundreds or thousands of metaphors because he would tailor his metaphors to the specific needs of his clients. What Erickson realized is that more often than not, our difficulties are not caused by a lack of information, but by defective or non-productive thought patterns. His metaphors allowed him to subtly suggest or slip in new patterns of thought or mental programming, and since their connection to the problem was not obvious, his patient's brain felt no inclination to resist them. I found myself reviewing Ericksonian hypnosis at the same time I was reading the war chapters in Alma. Although many chapters in the Book of Mormon are dedicated to doctrine, most are not. For example, in 1 Nephi, we read of Nephi stealing the brass plates from Laban and of his voyage across the ocean. Later in Mosiah, we read about Limhi's people escaping from the Lamanites. Or in Alma, we read about Ammon defending the Lamanite king's sheep. We read about the Nephites' cyclical struggle with pride. We read about battles and wars and so on. I had sometimes thought of these non-doctrinal stories as filler, to kind of help the overall story make sense. Or maybe, as we discussed a few minutes ago, the narrator was indulging himself by discussing a favorite story or a pet topic. But maybe, as with Milton Erickson's metaphors, the purpose of the scriptures might be to introduce our thinking to helpful thought patterns that subconsciously realign our thought processes. That also might explain why daily immersion in the scriptures is encouraged or even essential. Being honest, we don't learn much new information from the scriptures most days. But perhaps the point of daily immersion is to provide templates or thought patterns that help us subconsciously overcome those barriers that are holding us back. Now, I realize that this may all seem pretty woo-woo, but if you took every verse from the Book of Mormon that you've ever heard quoted, you'd probably, have 5 pages worth, maybe 10? That's only 1 or 2% of a 500-page book. So if the point of the Book of Mormon was just to provide us with a collection of quotes, then why did Mormon bother writing the rest of it, the other 98 or 99%? Why did he invest so much of his life scratching so much non-doctrinal information onto metal plates? One other quick thing. Another weapon that Erickson had in his arsenal was confusion. He deliberately used ambiguous language that left his patients' brains stretching to understand what he had just said. In fact, confusion can actually be a hypnotic tool. Here's an example of the type of gem that Erickson would drop into a conversation. That which is now will soon be yesterday's future, even as it will be tomorrow's was. Statements like that tie up your conscious mental resources and cause your brain to slip a gear. Your thoughts spin and you feel like you're on the cusp of understanding. And in these moments, while your brain is occupied trying to untangle that riddle, your subconscious finds itself open to suggestion. I'm not saying that the purpose of gospel teachings is to put us into a trance, but if your goal is to change thought patterns or better align yourself and your mind with inspiration, sometimes unanswered questions can help. My missionary nephew recently asked me a question about the Garden of Eden. Rather than giving him a simple answer, because nothing about the Garden of Eden is simple, I asked him why he thought God had given us such a confusing story. How many millions of hours have been spent by church members racking their brains over some aspect of the Garden of Eden? If God truly is omniscient, why doesn't he know how to get to the point? Perhaps the lack of clarity in the Garden of Eden story, or the lack of a definitive point in that and in so many of the Savior's parables, is completely intentional. Maybe the benefit of the non-doctrinal scriptures isn't to provide us with information, but to help change our thought patterns. One other quick thing. How many times have you found yourself in a gospel doctrine class pondering a new insight, even though you've heard the topic discussed 1,000 times before? Maybe these gospel lessons and discussions are meant to exercise our pondering muscles and to let us experience what insight feels like, so that we're better at doing it independently outside of class. Maybe they're a practice session in inspiration. If we get good at having insights about gospel topics, maybe that will make us better at having insights into other things. So, coming back to where we started, maybe we shouldn't dismiss or skip over the war chapters of Alma and trust that the person who wrote them knew what he was doing, whatever that might have been. And that's all I had for today. Next time we'll be covering Alma 52 through 55, which is pretty much all military stuff. But don't let that be a deterrent. I hope you'll join us. And if you're here and you haven't subscribed yet, you want to do that now. And we will see you next time.